The great thing about Kirby games is how they manage to be for everyone, and not just fun for the whole family, everyone. Like, actually everyone, from beginners to experts. I'll be informing you on the source of his power so that I can STEAL IT! Kirby's movement looks like this. Walk, run, jump, and float. Walk makes you move slowly, run makes you move quickly along the x-axis, jump gives you a quick boost in vertical speed, allowing the player to mostly keep their horizontal momentum, and float allows the player to move infinitely in any direction, albeit slowly. Note that if you float too long without touching the ground, Kirby will begin to fall. That will come up later. Take note of that. Kirby's float will essentially nullify most platforming challenges. The key is that it's slow and boring. Further, it's an option literally all of the time. Obviously, what makes this work is that I don't do it all of the time. I can't find it now, but I saw this interesting visual that divided a level into the safe and dangerous sections, noting a slow increase in dangerous over the course of the level. This might be a Mario level, but stick with me. The green areas are safe. You can wait in this section without being under threat because there's nothing there. Red is dangerous. These are platforming challenges you have to overcome, marked in this level by poison and unkillable enemies. Yellow is a sorta in-between, marked by killable minions. You turn this area into a green when you enter it and murderize all the obstacles. Mario levels are small segments that tend to test you on an individual gimmick. Here, the red sections usually represent teetering platforms. There's a small red section at first, sandwiched between two greens to introduce the gimmick. Then the game challenges you further as unbroken red sections only get longer and more perilous, with one final test at the end as the game makes you jump over several of the platforms uninterrupted. Kirby, on the other hand, is not constantly throwing new ideas at the player, which means that the change in level design philosophy takes place over the course of the game, not just in individual levels. As you continue through, levels transform primarily from green to yellow to primarily yellow and red. Green and yellow helps ease in beginners. Any sane person won't float over the green sections, because there's literally nothing there. It's inconvenient and completely unnecessary. Starting with this plants the idea in their head that they can swap between floating and running based on what the situation demands. Because playing the game at a sensible level already involves swapping between the easy option and the engaging one, we avoid the essential pitfall of the beginner level strategy. What if the player never stops using the easy option? What if they never stop spamming that one attack or try anything other than the beginner weapon? Instead of asking the player to stop using the crutch, the game just asks the player to reduce their dependency on it and increase the number of situations that they approach without it. Based on player skill, the amount of areas where they use the float where they could have taken it head-on will vary, allowing them to adjust the difficulty according to their tastes, making the game very accessible. It makes the game both hard and easy depending on how you play. However, the game still chooses to try and nudge the player out of their shell and take the game head-on with extended yellow sections, areas that are just plain flooded with enemies. When the player floats over or goes around a yellow, that spot is still left armed, and it's not a safe place to land. And Kirby will need to land, because the game limits how long you can float. Only inexperienced players will try to float over these spots, and thus will almost certainly either get hit or start falling then get hit. Either way, it won't go well, and they'll learn to instead try to cleave their way through, becoming comfortable with the yellow by being able to approach it from the safe spot, instead of trying to, skip it all entirely. As the game shifts to more red and yellow, the red sections help the player gain experience and transition to becoming a veteran. Veterans will naturally want to play the game efficiently, and due to the usage of numerous factors that will get more detail later, efficiency in Kirby games means beating the game quickly. A speedy player will just run through the yellow sections, either trying to bob and weave through enemies, or killing them as they run by, making them no different from reds. This helps with the difficulty curve, as the beginning green and yellow doesn't leave heavy obstacles. The progression to red and yellow leads to optimal gameplay becoming unending pressure. However, the catch is, the moment the player slips, the moment that becomes too much, they can carve a spot that they can breathe in. Additionally, the Kirby games take much more advantage of vertical space, having the float mechanic adapt to a different environment. In contrast to the continuous movement of the run, the jump is an efficient burst upwards, but the float comes back when the player either feels unsafe and wants more control over the situation, or the player needs to make some kind of calculation. While the float creates safety for beginners, it actually builds a lot of tension in veterans. Every time you float, you're slowing down, losing time. Would it be faster to float over this gap, or fall in and jump over? If I fall in and jump, I might bonk my face on the wall, which would lose me a bit of time. I'm not over the platform yet, but will I fall if I cancel now? If I'm early, I could lose time trying to activate it. I can float over to grab those fruits, but will DD catch up? How many points can I score while going faster? Vertical sections keep this tension especially high, because the flow is a much more essential part of the vertical movement kit. The player has to constantly dig for that quick vertical boost they get for jumping, but must also decide if it's safe and efficient to land on a platform, based on what hazards may be in the way. Is it worth risking getting hit? Is it even close enough to warrant going over? Once again, we have accessibility for the newcomers and an optimization game for the veterans. The float also serves one final function. If a player slips and has to activate this ability as an emergency shoot to avoid, say, touching an enemy or falling into a pit, a new player immediately regains full control over the situation. The game rewards them for reacting by canceling out their mistake, and gives them a safety net that encourages risk-taking. For veterans, using the float as an emergency shoot means a minor time loss as they frantically float to the nearest platform. It's a small punishment that prevents a mistake from becoming a severe interruption, which rewards them for reacting, but punishes them for slipping in the first place, maintaining flow, but punishing failure. A more challenging experience. However, newer players will likely still try to optimize the fun out of a game. Players will float over obstacles if they prioritize surviving. The usage of a health bar, in contrast to something more like Mario's power-up system, is a great first step, but you want to do something about players' desperation to stay alive. So maybe you could shift the primary goal by adding a tertiary goal in the form of recording the player's time. Maybe you could ease players into the idea. Try first making beating the timer bring the player closer to a victory condition, but losing to it does not guarantee a loss so long as they perform well in other areas. Making time a primary focus. Fucking focus! God fuck! Primary focus, but not a deal breaker. Then we could introduce a proper timer that will slap the player with a game over if it runs out. Finally, if that doesn't nail it in, we can show the player how fun it is to go fast by first introducing a speedrun character, fundamentally similar to our main character, but with a modified moveset that makes the game frictionless until they slip up, then have them burst through streamlined versions of the existing levels, and then time them segment by segment, making it much easier to... Fuck! Where am I going with... Have you noticed that all of these have been the same game? Not just Kirby, but Kirby Superstar Ultra the whole time. Game's like $20. Throw in another 20 if you need to get a DSi. Game's one of the best I've ever played. Required reading for 2D platformer fans. Man, Kirby games are so cool. I wish they were real. Anyway, the primary game design takeaway is, if you give the player a more efficient risky option and a safer less efficient way to complete their task, the player can actively implement risk-reward in accordance to how they're most comfortable. However, I do highly suggest finding a way to nudge the player away from always playing it safe. I've decided to call this the delightful scram-papa-wan-wan principle. Someone far more intelligent than I has probably wrote about this at some point, but I do called the delightful scram-papa-wan-wan principle and got no results, so, you know, the fucking moron should have made the research more public. Now for a breakdown of the delightful scram-papa-wan-wan principle in a combat setting. Combat in Shovel Knight includes two primary components, the shovel swipe and the shovel drop. Shovel swipe is the risky but efficient option. Bosses tend to move from left to right, and the attack is a very short range. It only does 1 damage, but it's extremely spammable. You'll need to wait for an opportune moment and then hit them as many times as you can. The shovel drop is safe because it hits opponents from the top, then promptly moves you far away from them. As bosses mostly move from left to right, it's a hidden rush. You can land a hit safely from the top where the movement isn't too jittery. However, the instant bounce into the air that makes it safe also makes it slow, because you have to wait to fall back down before landing another hit. The player has to recognize where the boss is on a sort of sliding scale of aggression, recognize how dangerous it is to strike the boss as well as how comfortable they are with going for a hit, and respond accordingly. However, to hear more about that, you're going to have to watch my video. The timer comes in during the challenge mode. Unlike Kirby, Shovel Knight actually kicks into high gear. If you try to beat the bosses with nothing but the shovel drop, the easier option, you'll run out of time and immediately lose. The game makes it pretty obvious too. The player needs to realize that there's something fundamentally wrong with how they think about the game if you want to force them in this playstyle without, handing them a manual. That's not to say that the timer is the only option. The core idea with the timer is to get the player to value speed over getting hit, so you might consider just devaluing getting hit. If you want to keep the health bar instead of axing it like Pizza Tower, substitute an ultra kill, turn the player into a health regenerating glass cannon. The player can only take a few hits, and because of that, death is always only a hair's breadth away. However, the player is allowed to regenerate their health by bathing in the splattered gore of their enemies. The ability Regenerate devalues individual hits, and the closeness of death normalizes going down, which removes the concept of playing passively in fear of it. This makes the player either decide to shoot them until they can't shoot back, or play evasively until they've regenerated enough health and ammo to shoot them until they can't shoot back. Either way, the point is, the player never drops the pace, so you might want to consider similar systems. The timer only serves to get the player in the mindset. It should be restrict enough for the player to realize that they're doing something wrong when they're exclusively using the safe option, but loose enough to allow the player a few slip-ups. If you're trying to appeal to normal humans, not speedrunners, whether it takes 55 seconds or 60, what matters is that the flow of combat, or, well, whatever you're applying this to, never stalls. As a side note, though, Shovel Knight relegates their timer to the challenge mode. You may want to allow the increase or disabling of timers in the accessibility settings. A small toggle in the accessibility menu should maintain the intended experience for the majority of audiences, but broaden the range for people who like your game but are repelled by that aspect. In summary, you give the player two options to complete the same goal. One should be risky and efficient, but more specific, while the other should be slower, safer, and much more of a catch-all. The player has to be able to dynamically switch between the two as they play. If you intentionally give the player points where they can safely use the efficient option, they'll begin to swap between the two on their own. However, to enable them, the player must be able to recognize efficient output, be that distance traveled, damage dealt, or anything else, as more important than slipping up. The most obvious way to do that is by recording their time, but there's other ways. This will get the player to dynamically adjust the game's difficulty for you, according to their own tastes, and allow them to improve at their own pace. You may want to introduce a propagate that forces the player to go at a certain level of efficiency in order to progress, but I heavily recommend allowing the player to remove it in the accessibility menu. Well, that's that. Thanks for watching. I hope this helps you rip the power straight out of Kirby's bones. Does Kirby have bones? I'll get back to you on that. Editing me, getting back to ya! They want to silence the truth. Did you think I was joking? Did you think I was doing a little silly ha ha ha? No! Sorry, I get like that sometimes. I can't control it. You'll forgive me, won't you? Great! Thank you so much for playing my game. Where was I? Where am I? Oh, yeah! Yeah, Kirby's Bones. So, if you'll take a look at this simple diagram, you'll see in the original Kirby Smash 64, Kirby does not have bones. Every other character does, Kirby specifically does not. However, as you may know, Smash 64 was created by Sakurai, the creator of the Kirby franchise. However, he's not responsible for creating Kirby anymore. His word is no longer gospel to the Kirby franchise, and if you look at this fun little diagram given by HAL Laboratories themselves, the people who make the Kirby games, you'll see that Kirby has a skeleton. You can tear that power out. It can be yours. Just come with me and you'll see. Fuck. Well, I don't have anything else. I improv this whole segment. Fuck 'em later, nerds. But hey, that's just a theory. A conspiracy theory. Thanks for watching! I have to go snort Diet Coke.